Right now, economically, all we're trying to do is maintain our economy artificially with immigration, with mass migration. And that guy is the most arrogant, power-hungry individual ever. It's his way or the highway. And anyone who dares challenge him will be set aside. We're cooked. There's no going back. The question was, can Canada turn this around? No. Mathematically, it is impossible. The arrogance, again, coming from Carney, and the belief that the mainstream media will just protect him and act as his propaganda arm might have been overstated in this case. You always need a triggering event. You always need something to get the ball rolling. I think this might be the triggering event when it comes to Carney. These people are complete lunatics in my mind. They have hate for not only the country of the US, but also the Western ideology, the value that ties Europe, Canada, the US together.
Journalism and commentary 1 year anniversary.
I don't believe journalism being funded by the government is the solution.
You have to rebuild the foundation.
You have to retell the stories.
Market conservative
Other news that actually matters.
I hence wanted to ask. I think they should answer their questions, especially if they're politically charged with.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Elie Cantin-Nantel. Something very disturbing is happening in Canada. Statistics Canada says that Canada has entered the ranks of countries with ultra low fertility. Now, you may wonder what that statistic means, and I will explain it in a moment, but it's very concerning, and it comes after more than 10 years of Liberal governance, a time where everything has become extremely expensive and in many cases unaffordable. So why is this concerning? Well, it's because 1.25 is below 1.3 children per woman, which is considered by demographers as the point of no return, meaning that when your birth rate goes so low that it's below 1.3 children per woman, then it's not possible to recover that population decline. And the only way you can increase your population is through mass immigration, which in the case of Canada has meant lots and lots and lots of people from third world, non-Western countries. So what exactly are the implications for Canada? Well, this is something that I discussed with today's guest, Elliot Daigneault. He is a YouTuber and podcaster who hosts the show The Right Call, which you could find on YouTube. It is a very good show. I highly recommend that you go and follow him. I'm a big fan myself. This is one of several issues that we discussed today. We also talked about Mark Carney's many conflicts of interest. We talked about the legacy media in Canada, and it is much worse than you think it is. And be sure to watch until the end because we discuss something that has just happened in New York City that is very concerning and that you need to know about. But before we get started, be sure you are subscribed if you're not already. Up to 80% of my viewers are not subscribed, and it goes a long way. You just hit the button. It's very simple, but it does a lot. Also, hype and like the video, hit the notification bell, and consider getting a paid channel membership for less than $5 a month, as I'm one of the only journalists left in Canada that refuses to take subsidies from the Carney Liberal government.
Elliot, welcome to my podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So one of the first times I saw you, it was on Instagram, and you did a reel about the decline of Europe, and you were focusing on the declining birth rate.
Europe will fall in the next 100 years. I don't think the world is overpopulated. I think we're underpopulated. In order for civilization to maintain itself, it must have a fertility rate of 2.11 kids per woman. Historically, no culture has ever reversed a 1.9 fertility rate, historically. And a rate of 1.3 is mathematically impossible to reverse. Where are we right now in Europe? France, 1.8. England, 1.6. Greece, 1.3. Dead. Germany, 1.3. Dead. Italy, 1.2. Dead. Spain, 1.1. Now, let's do a little calculation here. What is the fertility rate, the Islamic fertility rate in France? 8.1. In large French cities, 45% of children under the age of 20 are Islamic now. At this rate, in 40 years, France could become an Islamic republic. The world as we know it is just changing in a way that I feel is irreversible, and we're going to see the outcome of that eventually.
So in Canada, Statistics Canada, we now have a record low fertility of 1.25 children per woman. You talked about Europe, and yes, in Europe, the EU average is 1.34, but there are countries where it is below 1.3, like Spain and Italy. So for Canada, like how concerning is this for Canadians?
Yeah, so it's interesting because that video posted it last year, right? And I used to think, a bit like Elon does, it is the greatest existential threat to Canada, to our culture. The more I look at it, I still believe it's an existential threat, but I think it's perhaps even part of a normal cycle. So, what I mean by that is, see, right now, economically, all we're trying to do is maintain our economy artificially with immigration, with mass migration. And of course, that boosts nominal GDP numbers. It looks good. It looks good on paper. Politicians like to tap themselves on the back. But then you realize that on a per capita basis, we're either stagnating or even regressing. People's quality of life are not improving. And yes, it's true. It's due to, in part, the fact that we need to import people in the country. We're not having enough kids. But perhaps, if we're going to be stuck in between a rock and a hard place, between not having enough people to maintain the economy or importing our population base, but seeing all the downsides that comes with it, perhaps we should let the economy regress. And this is an idea I've been working on, and it goes completely against that video. But Japan is living through that right now, for example. Japan has had a plummeting birth rate now for way longer than Canada. Their economy have been in over a decade of stagflation. It's not looking too good, but we're starting to see signs that it's shifting around. Salaries are increasing, housing is affordable, and once you relieve the pressure on the youth, the economic pressure that they're living in, they start having families and having more downtime and leisure time and ability to focus on having kids. And the cycle starts over. Right now in Canada, to prop up our aging population, we are obviously importing loads of people. I mean, I believe we're importing at the rate of 1.5% of our population per year. 25% of the population of Canada is landed immigrants and permanent residents, which is insane. We top as immigration per capita in the G7, the G20, and the OECD. So we're at a point right now where we're seeing the downsides. Our culture is eroding, social cohesion is tearing apart. And I had to ask the question to myself. It's like, okay, if we account for the fact that our generation's cooked, let's say our generation's cooked, it sucks, but we've been dealt a bad hand of cards. Do we perpetuate the downfall of Canada so that future generations have nothing left and, they're living in a shadow of a former country that used to be great? Or do we bite the bullet and do what's right, let the economy shrink, and laid a foundation for a new prosperous tomorrow? So that's where I'm at right now when it comes to this whole fertility rate. But it is an issue and you need to have more kids.
Do you think Canada's past a point of no return, or do you think it would be possible to take on certain measures to re-increase the fertility rate? And I think you're right with identifying some of the causes. It's very expensive. I mean, in Toronto, in Vancouver, you need around $200,000, not for a home, for a down payment. The only thing most people can afford is small apartments. I know people in Toronto, they're earning six figures and they have multiple roommates because that's all they can afford. So obviously that has a factor. So if you remove that, does that solve the problem? Or do you think we now also have maybe a cultural problem? Like I see sometimes on TikTok, this whole double income, no kids, very hyper materialist thing where you have these couples that are all very miserable in the inside, but they pretend to be very happy because they decided that instead of having kids, they were going to buy themselves designer items and go on infinite vacations that don't actually look that great. I go on much nicer vacations personally, but so what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm going to take it two different ways. There's the mathematical aspect of it, and then there's the cultural aspect of it. Something that for me was shocking was seeing they did a poll in the US. So obviously this is not Canada, but I mean, it's very relatable, and they were asking questions about two mostly Gen Zs. So people that were born after 1997. So 97 to 2015. And the question was like, what would you say is not a quality life, but how would you categorize a successful life, or how would you define a successful life, I should say? And when it comes to the men of the poll, something like 30 plus, 33, 34% of them said having kids. And it was followed very closely by, like 30, 31% having a wife or, getting married. And then you had, the economy, good job and time for leisure, whatever. But if you looked at on the women's side of things, the number one defining factor of a successful or happy life was having a good career or being financially stable. Having kids and getting married was dead last at like 6 and 7%. So on the societal side of things, there's been a tremendous shift. And it appears, and again, I cannot confirm 100%, but it appears that it is mostly driven by 1/2 of the population. And that opens up a whole can of worm about, why that is, what are the causes. I'm not going to speculate on that. I just feel like right now, perhaps media, the breakdown of the family unit, the loss of community, the economy as well probably plays a role in that. Now, on the mathematical aspect of it, though, yes, we're cooked. There's no going back. The question was, can Canada turn this around? No, mathematically it is impossible. We cannot turn it around due to the fact that to maintain a population, you need 2.11 kids. 1.8 is the lowest threshold that a country has reversed a trend before. Like you said, we're below 1.4 right now. There's no reversing it. Mathematically, it is just impossible. There will be a decline unless we artificially maintain it through mass migration. But again, the downside that comes with it is with mass migration, you cannot have the time for integration. And without integration, your country loses its identity. And we're seeing it now. I mean, what's interesting to note is that immigration was never a contentious issue in Canada's history. It used to be
it wasn't. Even 6 years ago.
But it's still not, by the way. And this is what's funny with this point is that it's still not contentious. It used to be everyone was in favor of it, and now the majority is against it. It's still not contentious because the majority is against it.
Yeah.
There's just been a shift. There's been a shift because too much, too quickly, you start feeling the strain. Some of the people that are the most, we would categorize them as, left-leaning, maybe even overly empathetic. Some of these people that I know personally now are some of the most overtly open anti-immigration. They're the first one to speak up against certain individuals or groups that are being allowed here. So, yeah, but again, it's just going to be it's not a paradox, but it's a catch-22. If we preserve our culture and our country and our way of life, it will come with economic decline because we're past the point of no return. There's no ifs or buts. It's just a sad reality. If we want to maintain economic, let me say, viability, not growth, not any kind of prosperous nation, but just barely coasting by, well, then we have no choice but keep mass migration happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So in one of your recent podcasts, you were talking about Mark Carney and his conflicts of interests. So from the National Post, Mark Carney is subject to an ethics screen requiring him to recuse himself from government matters involving 103 specific companies. And he has a massive portfolio. Reading here, the extensive conflict of interest screen stems from his massive investment portfolio, which includes 574 direct and indirect stock holdings with major ties to his former employers, that's Brookfield Asset Management, as well as Stripe. So Mark Carney says he's set up a blind trust. But is that enough? Do you think, can you have this much stake, these many conflicts, and you could argue even investments in private companies and govern the country and not think about that? What are your thoughts on that? And
Yeah.
you think the blind trust argument is effective here?
Yeah. I'm going to rip off the, I'm just going to rip off, I guess, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury here and say there's no such thing as a blind trust. He had to personally divest all of his ownership stake in all of the companies he owned in order to become the U.S. Secretary of Treasury. And the reason why there's no such thing as a blind trust is because you choose the trustee. You can be in communication with the trustee. The trustee can give you updates on your portfolio. You're just not allowed to execute trades. That's a blind trust, effectively. So no, it does nothing. It does nothing. But furthermore, the whole Brookfield conversation for me is fascinating because it's a great deflection. The Liberals are more than happy to let that continue because it takes the sights away from the actual culprit. The conflicts of interest that Carney has, or at least a major one, are not connected to Brookfield Corporation. That's, the company you see on the stock market. That's the one he has stock options from his time working over there, as any executives normally are compensated, not only cash, but also stock options. His big conflicts of interest are driven by the Brookfield Global Transition Fund 1, which is not Brookfield. The BGTF is a private equity fund. It is completely separated from Brookfield Corporation. And in that private equity fund, Mark Carney was initially one of the managing director. And managing directors of private equity funds, just like hedge funds, oh my God, I was thinking venture funds, my bad, so simple, but just like hedge funds, the managing directors have a performance bonus. It's called a carried interest deal. And what it is that the fund will not guarantee, but will tell investors, which are limited partners in a fund, that we will have this rate of return at this amount of time in the future. That's called the hurdle rate. Anything above the hurdle rate, well, we're going to give a fat commission to the managers of the fund. The commission sometimes can go all the way up to 20%. Now, that carried interest deal is not something Mark Carney can divest from. In this case, I believe it's 3 or 4% because there's several managing partners, but he stands to make 3 to 4% of any money generated above the hurdle rate. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars potentially in his pockets as commission. That cannot be divested from. That is not in any way, shape, or form put in a blind trust. And those companies, those portfolio companies, the investment has already been made. It's not trading stocks. Rather, it's you're taking a position in the company. Oftentimes, you're putting directors on the board or you're appointing or making sure that you have some form of control and you're kind of reshaping the company to increase its value. That's been done. So now all that Mark Carney has to see and do is ensure that the portfolio companies of the fund, which, by the way, they're not thousands of companies, they invest very selectively, just maybe a dozen or so company in the fund. Well, you just have to make sure that they succeed. And then you start looking at what these companies are, where they're located, who they deal with, and you can do a compare and a contrast on policies that Canada are implementing, money that Canada is sending to certain countries under the auspice of foreign aid or helping out our partners. And then you start realizing everything, but I mean everything, ties back to those underlying portfolio companies within the fund, which Mark Carney stands to potentially make hundreds of millions of dollars by year 2032. So yeah, conflicts of interest, blind trusts. Yeah, this prime minister is unlike anything we've ever seen before in the history of Canada.
That's all very interesting. And I will say, I know somebody personally who used to be in Mark Carney's circle. So he knows him a bit. And he literally told me, Elie, this guy is a crook. He's not here for the country. And I mean, I don't believe Mark Carney's a patriot. This is a guy that took jobs out of Canada and moved them to the United States. This is a guy with 3 passports. This is a guy who left Canada to go work in Britain. And this is supposed to be the savior of our country. I'm sorry. Like I'm highly skeptical. I think we had a great gaslighting last year. And now, rather than electing Pierre Poilievre, who actually does care about the country, we've ended up with a man who literally describes himself as a globalist elitist. These are his own words. Staying on the topic of Mark Carney, sometimes I call him our super prime minister because that's what the media would like us to portray that it is, even though he's not that impressive. He announced a plan to bulk buy unsold condos in Vancouver. There's 2,200 condos that he wants to buy and turn them into affordable housing. We'll see what that looks like. This is part of a plan that he's doing with NDP Premier David Eby. It's a joint initiative where they will spend $3.2 billion over the next 10 years on housing stuff. So what are your thoughts on this decision? Because it got a lot of attention. Like a lot of people were very upset about this.
Big time. But just to add to the point you made before that, before Carney became prime minister, I have some good friends that are, well connected in federal politics, a lot of provincial too, but in federal. So I asked that friend before Carney ran and asked him, like, how is he really behind closed doors? Do you have any idea? And he's like, oh, we do. And that guy is the most arrogant, power-hungry individual ever. It's his way or the highway. And anyone who dares challenge him will be set aside. And I think we've seen this a few times. Sometimes the mask slips and you see his very controlling nature.
We see it in multiple ways. We see it in caucus with the reports of how he treats caucus members. Apparently he yells. We see it with how he treats reporters, the media, especially women. He's particularly nasty with women reporters. And then the most concerning is what I personally view as a disregard for democracy by having a manufactured majority through floor crossers, right? Like, that's all concerning. And I will just say, like, for those who want to defend Mark Carney or think maybe that I'm exaggerating, if Pierre Poilievre was doing all of this, we would be hearing about it nonstop every day. It would be called a threat to democracy. There would be calls for him to be removed from office. There would be calls for a snap election, et cetera, et cetera. That's not happening right now by the media. The media is going along with it. There was Rosemary Barton who defended the floor crossings and was like, bro, it's allowed.
Yeah, the developers. You know what? I'm actually kind of glad it's happening. Not because I think it's good for Canada, quite the opposite. I think it's one of the most horrible thing ever, and I'm personally against bailouts. But it's because for the first time in a very long time, both the left and the right, heck, the centrists, older, younger, it doesn't matter who, pretty much Canada is unanimous in their calling out this bailout. Everyone's against it. The NDP's mad. The Conservatives are mad. The centrists are like, what the hell? Nobody's happy about this. And you know what? It might have been the arrogance, again, coming from Carney, and the belief that the mainstream media will just protect him and act as his propaganda arm might have been overstated in this case. And I think it could be, you always need a triggering event. You always need something to get the ball rolling. I think this might be the triggering event when it comes to Carney, because people are saying, wait, whoa. You know, they've been calling you a central banker, an elitist all this time. And you know what? You spoke nice words and you said the nice things, but now wait a second, you're bailing out like massive development companies because they speculated on shoebox condos. Were they going to, share their profit after they made record levels of freaking money years ago when the market was up? No. But now because they speculate, they overstayed, they played a bad hand of cards, and it happens. It's investment. That's life. Well, we're supposed to bail them out. No, it's ludicrous. And at this point, anyways, Canada is surviving off subsidies. Every goddamn industry, for them to remain viable, you need to subsidize them. When I ran my tech company, and I started a tech company in Montreal when I was 23. Raised millions of dollars, Canada, US, expanded a little bit everywhere, had thousands and thousands of users on our platforms. But we used to joke, me and my executives at the time, that the only way to successfully run a business in Canada, specifically in Quebec, but in Canada in general, is to have the government as your client and or to be receiving subsidies. And I kid you not, at one point, and this is crazy to say, like wild to say, we were actually pulling in more revenue from applying for grants and subsidies and whatnot, tax credits, than we were working on bettering our product. That's the ecosystem we've built here. Well, we're seeing it in the oil fields. We're seeing it now with, condo developments and real estate. We're seeing it in the media. The media cannot survive here without billions of dollars from the government.
Mm-hmm.
So we've created just a nation and an economy that is so dependent on subsidies to stay afloat. And it's insidious because it becomes a vicious circle. It's like a wild animal. Okay, if you're told never to feed a wild animal because it can become dependent on you. Now, if you don't feed the wild animal, some of them will sadly die of starvation. They failed at hunting or at foraging food. It's sad. It's tragedy. Like, it's emotional for sure. But if you feed them, then they become dependent forever. And the day you're not there anymore, they die anyways. You're not letting the natural cycle, natural selection happen. That's just life. Well, businesses are the exact same. There's a natural selection process. We need to let that happen. We have to stop manipulating the economy.
Absolutely. If I can vent a bit on subsidizing the media, I just find it so lazy, because what happens is a lot of these legacy media and even some of the new independent media that have caved and taken the money, they've not innovated. Take my podcast, okay? There's me, and then I have someone on contract. We get more views than many legacy media outlets on YouTube. I know you do the same with your podcast. Costs are quite low. My number one expense is travel. The number one expense for all of these legacy media outlets is probably bureaucracy, right? They basically don't do the action that is needed to grow. And then they're like, that's okay, because we got the subsidies now. And how does that make sense? I will go bankrupt before I take subsidies from the government. I will never lower myself to that level.
Well, they'll never give you subsidies because they're
Well,
not.
yeah,
That's the
probably
issue.
too. But
It's
even
'cause
if they wanted to, like I will never lower myself to that level personally. You recently had a lunch with the U.S. ambassador, who's a lovely guy. I interviewed him recently, and big fan of him. A lot of Canadians don't like him though because of partly because of the subsidized media. So you mentioned that you were there with some other legacy media journalists, and you felt like they were very anti-American. And it is true that our media is first obsessed with the US. If you go on CBC every day, there's all the negative domestic US news. The liberals consume that like it's a drug almost, but their narrative too is always criticizing the US. So what was that experience like for you to be in a room with the US ambassador and a bunch of legacy media journalists? And did that change how you viewed the legacy media?
I mean, did it change it? No, it confirmed it. It confirmed it. And, I'll tell you exclusively here. I didn't even talk about it on my show. I didn't make any posts about it. I'm going to try to be vague, but yet descriptive. Because again, I do want to respect the fact that it was an off-the-record lunch, and I can't really speak to what was said. But before we got to the lunch, obviously at the U.S. Consulate General in Montreal, lots of security, as I'm sure it is at the embassy as well, in Ottawa. And so we passed security, and I'm like the last one to arrive there. And right away, I realized it was like 2 clicks. There's the very mainstream media. And look, I can say some of the biggest names, the people you see on TV, they were there, including, someone that also works behind the scenes, but was on TV. Okay. Again, the big names, they were there. And then they were all chit-chat. They all know each other. Oh my God. It was like gossip, like little hyenas, basically like old pals that are catching up. It was beautiful to see. And then to the side, you had one individual from another outlet that is, I'd say, probably one of the best outlet we have in Canada. At least the top 2 outlets we have in Canada, but it's more corporate. It's not subsidized whatsoever. And you could tell there's like a complete wedge between the two. Like they didn't really like each other. I arrived there and I started chit-chatting with them because, they don't know me, and like I recognize some of them, but I don't care. Like, hey, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. So we chat. They're super friendly. We get to the conference room, right? Sit down, and right next to me is the biggest talking head that you see on CBC. And right away, they see my name card. Oh, the right call. What is that? I'm like, it's an independent. I'm an independent political commentator. Roughly 250,000 subscriber followers across all platforms. And then, again, super friendly, not a problem at all. When the conversation starts with the ambassador, right away, I asked a question. I asked a question that was, could be construed as being a little bit anti-mainstream media right off the bat. Like the first question. And I said up front, I'm like, I'm not going to make friends, especially with the people in this room. And then I asked a question to the ambassador. From that very moment on, the tone between all of them changed towards me. Like you could tell. And even at the end, when I was saying bye to people, it was like super dismissive. Clearly, they put a big X on me because I'm not part of their cult, if we can call it that. But throughout the conversation, and again, without being able to verbatim say what was said, the anti-American sentiment was overt in the room. Some of the comments that were made to me, I thought were despicable and a complete lack of respect for the office of the president of the US, and also the person whom you're addressing. You're talking to the highest ranking diplomat in the country. There's a little bit of respect. And to give you an idea, if I was to meet Prime Minister Carney, I wouldn't, even though I don't like the man at all, I wouldn't address him as, hey, what's up, Carney? I'd be, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Yes, of course.
I respect the office. Not the man, but the office. Well, I can tell you there was no such courtesy or respect in that room that day.
That's pretty eye-opening. I will say, like, my relationships with legacy media, it's like 50-50. There are some that appreciate the work that I do, and they're very nice with me, and I'm very nice with them. And some of them even are paid subscribers to my newsletter. But then, there's others who, not at all. They're complete snobs. I think some of them probably resent the fact that I've had a lot of success at a young age, and that I get more views than them, and I get some of the same opportunities as them. Like I joined the Parliamentary Press Gallery when I worked for True North. I was 19 years old, and I was sitting at these press conferences with ministers, and around me, like, it was all like white hair, right? And I'm pretty sure they kind of resented that fact. I'm not trying to be cocky, but I'm just trying to be realistic of this sort of industry where you do have a lot of people with big egos. I will say, one of the most eye-opening moments for me, and because some of these people are lunatics, and this is an example. this woman, and I'm not going to say her name, but you've definitely seen her on Radio-Canada, which is the French CBC. She's one of their top political journalists. We were at a press conference with Pierre Poilievre in Ottawa, and we're waiting for Pierre to arrive. And she literally starts going off about how Trump is a dictator who's going to remain in office post-2028. She actually believed that. Like, that's a full-on conspiracy theory. And this is somebody that we're being told we need to listen to because this is a trustworthy source that is combating misinformation and conspiracy theories. Like, excuse me? Like, I was stunned because you know what? And I was stunned how confident she was just saying this to everybody. Like, I have some of my like controversial views and stuff. I don't like say them with that amount of confidence to a bunch of strangers in the media. Like, my gosh, the gall there.
But even pushing it further, right? I think on the right, and I know the independents were very likely to do so, but we encourage people to take everything with a grain of salt and to dig and do their own research and to, be critical. Be critical. It's not because I say something, it's not because you say something that you have to believe it. And same thing with the mainstream media. We don't portray ourselves as being the single point of truth. However, what we do, and I think, and I know you do, especially as an investigative journalist, is that you seek to find the truth. And if you get it wrong, you'll admit it. And if new data comes to light, you'll shine the light on that new data. We want the truth. That's all I care about. I want to get to the bottom of things. But the media doesn't do that at all. And you start realizing, especially again behind closed doors and when you have experience with them, that their personal biases and their personal views is part and parcel of their reporting and the information they put out, but yet they lack the forthrightness, the honesty, the transparency to say that, hey, this is an opinion, this is not a fact. They pass it off as fact, and that's what's dangerous.
You know, I would have a lot more respect for some of these people that are more opinionated if they were just honest about being opinionated. In the past, I've been offered contracts for it was conservative media outlets, but they still wanted me to be neutral, and I literally, these are like electronic contracts, so you can hit reject, and I said, you're going to rewrite this because I think it's dishonest to pretend to be neutral when you clearly have views. So the way that I do my podcast is I will explain both sides and I'll tell the audience where I stand on that particular issue. And I think if some of these journalists would do that, I would definitely trust them more because there I wouldn't feel like I'm being gaslit. They would at least be transparent about their opinion. Staying on the topic of the U.S., because this was with a launch for the U.S. ambassador, there's something that happened in the U.S. that's maybe a little concerning. There was the primaries in New York State this week, and there were a bunch of candidates that were backed by Zoran Mamdani, who's the socialist mayor of New York. And I want to read you who some of these people are. So we have this one woman. Her name is Dozarlia Avlia Chevalier. She's a young woman and she converted to Islam because of the quote unquote grace and love and passion that her Muslim friends had for social justice. Here are some of the things that she has said. Quote, I forgot to get napkins, so I just wiped my hands on the American flag behind me. She's called America a disgrace. She called for not only defunding the police, but she says that her vision means ending policing, full stop, period. No more police ever. She wants to literally abolish the border and that all deportations are wrong. She also went as far as to call Joe Biden a rapist and a war criminal and said Kamala Harris. And apparently Bernie Sanders and AOC, two of the most anti-Israel politicians in America. Well, apparently they're too pro-Israel, according to her. There's this other woman, Claire Valdez. She wants to abolish TSA pre-check. For people who don't know who that is, we have something similar in Canada called Nexus, and I have it, and it's great. You give a bit of your information to the government.
No, it's bad. Don't tell people not to get it. We don't want more people to have it.
We don't want them climbing it up. Anyway, it's expedited airport security. And she wants to abolish that. And she also wants to nationalize airlines. Because if you think the airlines are bad as private companies, just imagine if the government begins to run them. And then there's another woman, and this is not for Congress, this is at the state level, Aber Kawas. She's a Palestinian-American activist who once said, quote, the system of capitalism and racism and white supremacy and Islamophobia have all been used to colonize lands, to take resources from other people. And so this is a long trajectory, and we're seeing the manifestations of that continuation with 9/11. So basically downplaying 9/11. Absolutely lovely. What are your thoughts on like all these people being elected? Because we like to say that the US is maybe more conservative than Canada, but I'm not aware of people like that being elected to a mainstream party in Canada.
Have you seen the NDP?
Yeah, but it's the NDP, right? And even there, like we've not yet seen this level of crazy, I think.
Not this level of crazy. See, the thing I love about America, and yes, I'm gonna use this as a positive point about America, is the passion and the intensity that they have. Canadians are moderate, or they try to be subdued, polite. They don't ruffle too many feathers. It's politically correct at all times. I'm an American at heart, dude. I love how passionate it is in the U.S. And if you're on the right, you're on the freaking right. And if you're on the left, well, you're becoming Stalin, basically Marxist. You know, like freaking Karl Marx is not left enough for you. And to be honest, I like that kind of duality. Now, what's going on in New York for me is just mind blowing because it's the contrast. I remember I remember being in grade 2, grade 3, no, grade 4. I was in grade 4 when 9/11 happened, I think, whatever. I remember watching it in class. And to think that within, less than 3 decades, we're at a point now where they're electing people that are making fun of 9/11, that are disparaging the country, that are openly anti-American. It's crazy. It's what has happened to the state of New York. But the beautiful thing, though, with the U.S., again, with being a republic, each state, you know what, being sovereign to an extent, let New York rot. Let it rot. Let it be a cautionary tale. The same way California is a cautionary tale to the rest of the U.S. And what happens later on is that the people that are level-headed or well-adjusted or wealthy end up leaving. We've seen that exodus in California in favor of Texas, and Florida is growing at an unprecedented rate. Again, inflow of capital. Let it be. Let it be. And you know what? It's only once at a precipice that people find a will to change. I say this all the time, and clearly in Canada, we haven't reached a precipice. People are willing to endure and deal with a lot more than I anticipated, so let it be. But in the U.S., watching, again, those two states become literal shithole, dare I say, well, maybe that's what's needed to ensure the viability and the survivability of all the other states. Sometimes you need to go through struggle. You need to, the same way during World War II, the world got together and they learned the real definition of freedom and of honor and sacrifice. And then that, led to prosperous several decades after. Well, again, it's a cycle. It's time that we realize the same thing. So let it fall, let it burn. And these people are complete lunatics in my mind. Why the hell are you in the United States if you hate that country to that extent? I dislike the state of Canada right now, but I don't hate Canada. And I wish Canada was doing better. But they have hate for not only the country of the US, but also the Western ideology, the value that ties Europe, Canada, the US together, all our common descent. Yeah, it's, and they're violent too, by the way. These people are incredibly violent.
The left is, and I did a deep dive in this after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and they've done some studies, and they found that the left believes more than the right, but very concerningly, that violence can be justified, and also more concerningly, there is a greater percentage of mental illness in the left compared to the right. This was again a study. This is not just me riffing off a meme of like, oh, liberalism's a mental disorder. No, like there is greater mental illness on the left. And these are also the people who believe that violence is more acceptable. That's concerning. That's concerning.
But and further to that, you've brought up 2 points that are insanely concerning together. Now let's make it a trifecta. The trifecta of extremism on the left is the fact that they see themselves as more morally righteous in defending democracy with what they're doing, right? Because they've labeled successfully, and thanks to a lot of mainstream media, anyone who opposes them as insert your favorite ism, bigot, racist, a Nazi, you name it, right? Anything you desire, they've labeled us. So they have that cocktail of higher likelihood of mental disease. And I've seen that study, and you're completely correct in what you're saying. You have the propensity to violence. And then you have this moral high ground, this moral righteousness that you believe you're doing the right thing to preserve, to save the world. And well, you wonder why some cuckoo lunatics do what they do. It should be denounced and called out. And we should also offer mental health support for these
Yes.
individuals instead of just enabling them and telling them, no, it's okay. You got strong feelings, baby. Don't worry about it.
Absolutely. Well, Ellie, these were all the questions that I had, but it was a pleasure talking, and we'll definitely have to have you back on. But before I let you go, where can people find you?
Absolutely. So Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, it's HRH_Elliot, and Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, it's The Right Call Podcast, or it's just Right Call Podcast, my bad, but it's called The Right Call with Elliot Daigneault.
And this sums up today's podcast. I want to know what you think, so put your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to follow me and follow Elliot. And until next time, God bless.